I am Betty Casey. I'm editor of TulsaKids magazine, and we have partnered with OSU-Tulsa and the Tri-City Collective to bring you a series of conversations called Dismantling Racism. Today, we're going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Day and some of the what Dr. King means today to some of us, and especially locally. I want to introduce our moderator and our panelists today. Our moderator, as always, is Croatia Lee Lansane. He is the author of 20 books of poetry, nonfiction, and children's literature. He is a Tulsa Artist Fellow, writer in residence, and adjunct professor at Oklahoma State University, and a former faculty member of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the Juilliard School. Lansana is executive producer of KOSU NPR's Focus Black Oklahoma, and his forthcoming titles include Those Who Stayed, Life in 1921 Tulsa After the Massacre, and Opal's Greenwood Oasis. He is a member of Tri-City Collective. So welcome, Quraysh, and thank you for being our moderator. Our panelists today are, I'm finding my page here, the Reverend Dr. Turner, Robert R.A. Turner. He is the pastor of historic Vernon AME Church in Tulsa. It's the only edifice which survived the 1921 race massacre on Greenwood. Additionally, Dr. Turner is now the academic dean for Jackson Theological Seminary in Little Rock. He sits on the National African American Reparations Commission, Board of Trustees of the American Village, the 1921 Race Massacre Centennial Commission, Tulsa Mass Graves Oversight Commission, president of the historic Greenwood Main Street District, the Board of Directors for the Grit for Democracy, Terrence Crutcher Foundation, North Tulsa Task Force, Demanding a Just Tulsa, and the advisory board of the Blackburn Institute of the University of Alabama, and the chairperson of the board for the Turner Ministry Association. So he's busy. Wow. Welcome, Reverend Turner. Our second panelist is Nekki Reagan-Neeley. Nekki is a native Tulsan. She's born and raised in North Tulsa and a proud graduate of Booker T. Washington High School. She holds degrees from Tulsa Junior College, which is now Tulsa Community College, Northeastern State University, and the University of Oklahoma. She currently serves as the Assistant Vice President for Student Services and Community Engagement, Oklahoma State University, Tulsa. She is also an adjunct professor of communications at Tulsa Community College, and she serves as a board member on the Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Society. So I want to welcome her as well. With this milieu of things happening in the United States and locally, I feel like Martin Luther King Jr. maybe the day takes on a new meaning for us. I know that I was a little more reflective this year than I have been in the past. So I think, maybe having a deeper discussion about Martin Luther King Jr. and what he was and what he stood for might be a really enlightening conversation for all of us to have.
So. Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Ms. Nekki and Reverend Turner, for joining us for our series. I want to just share this thought that came to mind. I read something yesterday, I believe, that 2 Wednesdays ago there was an insurrection, then last Wednesday there was an impeachment, and then yesterday, the third Wednesday in January, there was an inauguration. So what's next for the January Wednesdays to come, right? Like how eventful. I think we need to make Wednesdays a holiday in some way so we can get a break or something. I don't know. But thank you again for joining us. We titled this event Beyond I Have a Dream, which of course I Have a Dream is one of Dr. King's more famous, and at least in mainstream and popular culture, more famous, probably most recited or quoted speech. So it has some impact, although we're going to get later to some other speeches that I think that resonate with you both. but why do you think that particular speech is often such a focal point of history when we think about Dr. King? Why is that particular speech sort of been co-opted in many ways, or at least, I don't know, at least borrowed by the mainstream? What do you think about that?
Well, Q, I would say that his empowering speech aligned more so with the MLK, the 2021 MLK parade theme this year, which is standing strong for justice, standing strong for truth, and standing strong for freedom. And these three very important things are still we're striving for. Dr. King quoted, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Now, I would say that Dr. King, in my opinion, he paved the way for hope. He paved the way for faith, unity, as well as equal opportunities. Now, I would say we had our first African-American president in 2009 that served not only one term, but he served 2 terms. And yesterday, I must say, I can't say it enough, we made history again with the first female African-American South Asian vice president who was sworn into her office yesterday. And as a female, as an African-American, we feel that our dream maybe is no longer deferred. We can now maybe wake up because the possibility has been proven. So I think Dr. King would be proud of us for us going in that direction. And I must say that I wish my mother and my grandmother was here on earth to witness such history. So thank you.
Rev, what do you think?
I think to answer your question, why is his "I Have a Dream" speech so well received by people? Is that a correct paraphrasing of what you were asking?
Yes.
I think it's because you have a segment of the population that takes really just a piece of that speech. They extrapolate a piece of that speech that is palatable to them. One phrase you hear all the time from that speech is, Dr. King said we ought not be judged by the color of our skin, by the content of our character. He was talking about what he would like for his children to grow up in the "I Have a Dream" speech. He said, "I would like for my children to grow up in a nation where they would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And people try to use that, which I agree with that statement. But they try to use that statement to completely say the only thing King cared about was having a colorblind society, where people just don't see color. Like, I just don't see color. I don't see. That's what Dr. King talked about, and they try to use that same statement to go against initiatives that target communities of color for equitable uplift, right? When we have a need for affirmative action in communities of color, you have people using Dr. King's speech and say, well, Dr. King didn't want race-based studies or race-based projects because he wanted everybody to be treated. So that's not what he said.
Right.
That's not what he said at all. And if you listen to the other portion of that speech that I hardly ever quoted, very seldom quoted, he talks about coming to DC because America has written a check to African Americans marked insufficient funds.
Insufficient funds, yes.
But none of these people that quote that, judged by the color of their skin versus content of their character, would ever quote that portion where he's saying America has written Black people a check marked insufficient funds. And so it is that check that we still need to cash,
right.
That we have yet to cash, because it is insufficient funds. So I think that's why I Have a Dream speech, because it's very glowing and it's very positive, and I agree with everything that's in it. But I think it's unfair and really intellectually dishonest for some in our society to parse out statements and use that as the full culmination of what the I Have a Dream speech is about.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That was very well stated. So what speeches or quotes most resonate with the two of you from Dr. King? Anything come to mind that's really sort of stuck with you over the years?
Yes, I have quite a few.
Well, go
Be
ahead.
honest, yes. I would say the one that I really love is, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. Or whatever you do, keep moving forward, keep pushing. This means don't give up. Don't give up on the dream. I love that one. You want to go next, Dr. Turner, before I?
Yeah, I think I already stated mine. America is in debt
Yeah.
to African Americans. You cannot enrich yourself for 400 years off the backs of free labor, off and tearing families apart, kidnapping us. None of us signed up willingly to go on those slave ships. Not a one. The largest mass deportation of any ethnicity in the history of the world. In the history of the world, nobody has been transported in the numbers that the Africans were from their continent, and forced to work, changed our names, took our religions, changed our names, separated our families, raped our mothers, castrated our men. And then after that, after the Civil War, they had laws like black codes where they basically made our existence illegal. Right. And then after that, and at the same time they're doing this to us, they're giving out checks and subsidies to whites and Europeans to come to America. They gave them land, took it from the Native Americans to come out west. They gave them money to build farms, and they gave them money to start school, same schools that discriminate against us. So we had to form Tuskegee, we had to form Morehouse, we had to form Spelman, we had to form Langston, right? And then when we come back from the war, you give GI Bills to only the white veterans. And then you have these communities that we cannot even get government-backed loans to build houses in. And then after that, you have this war on drugs, and when you, again, criminalize blackness. And whereas Michelle Alexander said, it's new Jim Crow. And so I think America is in debt. And at the same time, African Americans, from Crispus Attucks, who gave his life for this country, first person ever gave their life for this country, to now recently, 2 weeks ago, Eugene O'Connor, black Capitol Police officer, who helped save Vice President Pence and Nancy Pelosi's life. Black people are still putting themselves on the line. We still fought in every war, from the American Revolution, with Crispus Attucks, Buffalo Soldiers, Tuskegee Airmen. We still fight. World War I and II, Vietnam, Gulf Shores, the so-called war against terrorism. We fight in every war for a country that has never shown that she's willing to fight for us. And so I think one of my favorite quotes of Dr. King was when he said, he was talking to some students, he said he's going to the nation's capital to get our check because we have not received any reparations for anything since we've been here, in spite of the fact we still serve and love this nation.
Exactly.
Yeah, we do. All right, Miss Nekki, you have one more?
I do.
Go ahead.
People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated. And this kind of takes me back as to what has transpired over the last 4 years. So this one really resonated with me quite deeply. It's that fear. It's the fear of power, the fear of losing power, which often leads to anger. Yeah. I want to drill down on that a little bit too. So my favorite MLK quote is, "A riot is the language of the unheard," right? So how does that quote, in your opinions, how does that quote manifest in Black America today? How does it apply to Black America today? And to what Ms. Nekki just said, to her point, how do you think it applies to the insurrection of January 6th? Again, the first Wednesday of the month, right? Of these three consequential Wednesdays in January. But a riot is the language of the unheard. How do you think it applies to Black America today, and then also to what happened on January 6th? Want to go first, Dr. Turner? Or
I'm from the South. I was raised with ladies go first, but if you
Oh,
would
okay,
like,
okay,
I would, whatever you would like to do.
okay. Well, I would say it definitely brings attention to the forefront that people want to be heard. They're not listening. We don't feel like no one is hearing us. And we feel like no one is hearing us, our cries for help. Then action needs to be taken, you know. Social justice needs to be rendered, because we're not being heard is when the riots occur, because we want to find a way to bring attention, to bring about justice of reoccurrences. That's just not happening. And then I think it for this mob, what they termed a mob that took place at the Capitol. I think that's just a result of those fearing, again, loss of power, and for fear the future as to what the new America could possibly look like.
Okay, Rev?
Yeah, I think that and as a president who made this quote, those who make peaceful progress or transition impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Right, and I'm paraphrasing that. And we have on countless occasions had people in every generation, from every background, from this nation's founding in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. We've had countless individuals rise up in the history of this country, from Frederick Douglass to Harriet Tubman, to W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, to the Martin Luther Kings and Medgar Evers, and we've had countless people throughout history try to inspire this nation peacefully. Like none of those folk I mentioned have ever led any violent protest.
Right.
They tried to utilize the means of this nation to provide for equality and justice. And so now there is a generation of people who have learned from the history of this nation, and they see.
Uh-oh, did we lose him? Did he freeze up?
Froze up.
He's frozen.
Uh-oh, he was in the middle of a point too.
Yes, it was. Very good point.
He was flowing.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, Rev, we're losing you a bit, Rev. Uh-oh.
Well, all right. One of the points that he was making while we're waiting and thinking about that is he was talking about the leaders and the leadership of history. Think about who are the leaders today? Who are those new leaders that are coming forth today?
Yeah, agreed. Go ahead.
Okay, so Q, I know you asked us the question, but I'm curious what your thoughts are regarding your favorite quote and what happened in the Capitol.
Well, first of all, I mean, I believe that quote has resonated with me for most of my life because of the notion of those, when you feel like you're unheard, when you feel like you don't have a voice, when you feel like no one is paying attention to your wants and your needs, or even your thoughts and your dreams, you publicly share that. It manifests publicly in various ways, often in very violent ways, sometimes in very positive or peaceful ways. I think about, I teaching, and Rev, we're going to come back to you now that you're back here in just a moment and finish this thought. I teach a hip hop poetics class here at OSU-Tulsa that starts on Monday. I've been teaching it for decades in Chicago. And it is the history of hip hop, and hip hop evolved, right, from the bombed out, setting buildings on fire to get for folks to get arson insurance, insurance monies, bombed out, neglected South Bronx, and graffiti or tagging, right, which is one of the 4 elements of hip hop, is just that. It is a peaceful way to use your voice to say, I'm here. That's what graffiti art is I'm here, right? Mm-hmm. And so that from the hip hop culture is a manifestation of this idea of that I want to be heard, see me, right? And then in terms of what happened on January 6th, I believe very, very passionately, again, and we can talk about this later too, the difference between how Black bodies were treated at Black Lives Matter, and white allies, I should say as well, at Black Lives Matter protests versus how the white mob, mostly white mob, was treated with kid gloves on January 6th, even folks getting out of the way, opening guardrails, opening doors for them to come in, speaks to, in my mind, a kind of white privilege that suggests that you all will hear me and I will come and take what I want for you to hear and see me. And I can do that because I am white and I don't fear police. I don't fear the criminal justice system. I don't fear any of these things because I am white. Therefore, I am empowered. I feel empowered to just come and tear your house down, right? Mm-hmm. Dr. Turner, go ahead and if you remember what you were saying, completely.
Yeah, I was just saying we have a combustible combination here. You have a very violent and afraid population who knows what they have done. And you have a population of people who are still trying to have their grievances addressed and they're getting ignored. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, as Malcolm X mentioned, America is in a powder keg. You know, mm-hmm. we are at a Kairos moment, and we are sitting powder keg. But I must commend still, in the face of all of that, people who come out and gather peacefully to list their grievances. But also, as it relates to the insurrection 2 weeks ago on January the 6th, 2021, I think we have to note a distinction between people who are unheard, right? Mm-hmm. African Americans who suffered over 400 years in this country versus people who are unhinged. And folks 2 weeks ago were unhinged.
Right.
They were mentally deranged. I mean, I hear people say they act like children. That's disrespectful to children. Mm-hmm. Children act better than that at the White House. In fact, I've given tours of the White House and I was an intern in college. I've seen people's pets act better than that at the White House, at the nation's capital. There's a difference between people who are unheard and people who are unhinged. 2 weeks ago, people were unhinged. America is mentally bipolar. We after every incident, right? We have people come out and say, "Well, this is not America. This is not who America is." But she keeps showing you who she is. They were saying this after Emmett Till was killed in Mississippi, and his mother had an open casket funeral because she wanted the world to see what they did to her son. Right. They said this wasn't America after Trayvon Martin. They said this wasn't America after Eric Garner. They said this wasn't America after George Floyd, and the police officer had his knee on his neck for like 9 minutes. But America keeps showing you who she is. Yeah. So it's like America has a mental bipolar disorder where she doesn't realize who she really is. She's expressing certain behavior on one hand, but then on the other hand, she's saying, "Well, that's not me. I don't know who did that. I didn't do that. That's not me." But we see what you do. Yeah. But you come back and keep saying that's not you. That's not who you really are. And I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm really being premature in my assessment. But in my humble opinion, America is very much so bipolar and schizophrenic. And needs to take some medicine. But unfortunately, what America does, she kills the physicians that give her the medicine. Right. Oh, okay. She killed Martin Luther King. Yeah. She killed Medgar Evers. It's almost like you have a mental condition and you got a doctor telling you this is the medicine you need to take. And instead of taking it, you kill the doctor. Right. I don't have any problem. Okay, you're the one that's causing the problem, saying I got a problem. Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Very, very well said. We do have a question or comment from Facebook. Wouldn't defunding the police bring widespread change faster? I'm for reallocation, training, and more checks and balances of positions of power.
Well,
Well, okay, let's talk about that defunding the police. I know the House put forth a bill, George Floyd bill to do something about systemic racism in policing. That it died in the Senate.
right.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe defunding the police. And Q, you pointed out very accurately, I think, the performance of the police at the Capitol as opposed to other Black Lives Matter protests. So.
I agree, and I think that one of the things about the movement to defund the police is, I don't think anyone on this panel and most folks, most rational human beings are saying that we don't need police. We do need police, but it's about taking some of the budget that police receive annually and putting it towards community programs, youth programs, other ways to use that money so the police can attempt to diminish, if not eliminate, the profound distrust that people of color have with the police. And we have hundreds, if not centuries, of reasons to distrust and be uncomfortable with the police. And I think that even particularly here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right, that police need implicit bias training. They need, I believe very strongly in the community policing model that Tulsa had for a while prior to my moving here, started by Drew Diamond, who was then sort of ran out of the police chief's office. But also the gulf between the community and the police is huge. And we have statistics every year from the equality indicators in Tulsa that suggest significant reasons why. Black bodies are policed 3.5 times, I think, percent higher than white bodies in this town. More young folks of color in North Tulsa have interactions with the police by profound percentages than young white folks in South Tulsa. So it's real, right? And until the city and the government put some money behind saying, first of all, acknowledging that it's real, and then secondly, putting some money into how do we build this bridge? How do we remove this chasm in real and consistent ways? And that's what defunding the police means to me. It means redirecting resources beyond incarceration, right? And I support it 100%. Does it mean eliminating police forces, the police departments? No, that's not. I don't think that's realistic. But it does mean I don't trust cops, and I'm 56 years old, and I have advanced degrees. And every time I drive my car at night, like when I was leaving the studio last night at 1:30 in the morning, thinking about I have to have an alibi because I'm a Black man driving in dark, and I'm 56 and I'm a professor, right? And I will always feel that way. And I think most of us will, right?
That is true. That is true, especially for our sons,
Yeah.
We, as parents, you always say, well, call me when you get there, or call me while you're en route, just to ensure that they are safe. Because we have, sadly, we have to educate our sons, even our daughters, about how to respond in a situation that may be challenging with the policeman. What is the right thing to do, what not to do, just be quiet. Do you talk? This is an educational moment, it's a matter of, life and death, for our children. So I would say defund the police, but, put resources into educating everyone as to, what our next steps are, so that we can build more trust, with the police, because, we need them, but we need that trust as well.
Yeah. Reverend Turner, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that, and really what we're asking for is reallocation. We've turned local police into paramilitary units, that have tanks and things that things that governments have, our local police department has. And I'm sorry, but I don't think, the local drug dealer house is so impenetrable that you need a tank to go inside, So I think that much more resources should go to mental health training. This mental illness stuff is real.
It
right?
is very real.
And I think a lot more services need to go to children's services and in homes. It's amazing to me how we people who go and shoot up churches, particularly Black churches, and go and do these terrorist attacks, how we quickly try to find a mental illness defense for them. But the same local criminals in your community, you just want to label them as thugs and felons, right? With the same compassion we have on these mass murderers, who go into schools and shoot the place up, we ought to have locally in our community. I mean, nobody in kindergarten grows up and says they want to sell drugs, right? That's not a career choice people have. It's a reason why people start doing that. And in fact, now a lot of the drugs these guys sell have become legal. So really, what's the whole point in some of these drug enforcement units increasing their funding while we're legalizing some drugs, certain drugs? And if you ask most children, the drugs that these people are taking now don't come from the streets; they come from the pharmacies.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
But that's a conversation nobody wants to have. In fact, the state of Oklahoma just sued a pharmaceutical to prove my point.
Right.
Most of the drugs people take now, they're not sold by the local dope man.
Right.
They sold by Walgreens and CVS.
Right.
And I'm gonna leave that alone.
Yeah, that's real though. That's real. No, that's very real.
That is very real. Very real.
We have several comments and questions. One question is, what special role does the faith community have in Tulsa? What special role does the faith community in Tulsa have in dismantling racism? So
Go ahead.
I think part of the role that the faith community has, and I preach this literally to the choir at church, is unfortunately faith has been used to uphold racism. And that's a sad fact. The faith community in America has been used to justify things such as slavery, Jim Crow. I mean, they actually had doctrine and people preached this stuff. And some of the leading evangelicals in this country's history were slave owners, revered preachers of the Great Reformation. The Great Awakening. Were slave owners. George Whitefield, he sold slaves to build his orphanage for white children. Jonathan Edwards, first president of Princeton, he owned slaves.
Right.
So we have to be honest. When we ask faith to dismantle racism, oftentimes that will cause some dismantling within some denominations, who prospered because of slavery, because the members of their church owned slaves and they paid tithes to these churches. In fact, most churches that were built before 1865 were built by slaves.
That's right.
And so I think we need to be very honest with ourselves about the role that faith has played, the role that so-called places of faith have played. But also as a pastor, I know the role that faith can play in dismantling all sin. And so I do agree with that, but I must, before I even go into that, I must preface what I'm saying with the historical context that most people see the church, most people who know history anyway, that the church has been a major purveyor of doctrine that encouraged racism.
Right.
The folk who went to the Capitol 2 weeks ago, I'm not a bad man, but we live in Oklahoma where they got casinos on every corner. If I were a bad man, I would bet $1 to your dime that 90% of those folk attended somebody's church. And they went to somebody's Sunday school. And the crucial question is, if you go to a place of worship, if your place of faith does not speak to the original sin of America, racism, then what are they talking about?
Right.
Why are you still going to a church that doesn't have it, that's not preached a sermon against racism? Because see, some of my preacher friends will say, well, I don't support racism. I don't preach hate. I don't preach people should hate folks because of the color of their skin. But do you preach against it?
That's it. Yeah.
It's not enough for you just to be silent and say, well, I don't encourage my members to do that. In spite of the fact that I was told that some churches actually paid, and some people in Oklahoma actually were paying for transportation for folks to get to the nation's capital 2 weeks ago. That's
right.
another conversation.
It is.
It is.
Yeah,
Really
but what are you preaching? And for people who go to these churches, can your pastor say Black Lives Matter and still be the pastor the next week? Can your pastor denounce racism and white supremacy?
Right.
Can your Sunday school teacher teach a class on that? If we talking about sin.
Right.
Because it seems the only sin some of these folks care about is what folks do in their bedrooms. But as I read about it, there are many more sins besides that.
Yeah, there are a couple.
And so I think we have to be honest with what faith has done. I know for a fact that faith can be the unifying and really, in my opinion, is the unifying figure and unifying force in the world, because faith really undergirds and defines love. Like, I only know what love is because of what my faith teaches me
That's
love is.
exactly right.
And so I know faith can bring us together, but a part of coming together, we must recognize truth.
Yes.
Part of coming together, there can be no unity without accountability. And to ask me to unify with a group that you don't want to hold accountable is really not asking me to be on equal footing. You're asking me to come to your table,
right,
versus us making the table together.
Right. Yeah. Miss Nekki, you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
I think he said it all.
Reverend, I would like to encourage anybody that's watching this to read letter from Birmingham jail that Dr. King wrote, because a lot of what you're saying is a lot of what he wrote in that letter, and it's resonated so much with me. And so much of what you're saying is what he was saying from that letter.
Yeah, thank you. And Betty, thank you for reminding me of that last night. So I actually am going to read a quote from the letter from Birmingham jail, right? Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection, right? Which is sort of speaking to what Reverend was just talking about just then, right? It's sort of like silence, you're culpable. Your silence makes you culpable, right? It doesn't free you from anything. It just makes you complicit because you refuse to engage in being against whatever, right? Whatever that thing is. So, all right. So I want to move on. We've got a few more minutes, about 15 minutes or so. So let's bring it home for a second. Let's bring it to Tulsa, okay, right? So you all know, and I've only been in Tulsa for 2.5 years. So this struck me, but y'all have been here a bit longer. Miss Nekki, your whole life. Betty, I think your whole life as well, right? So MLK Boulevard wasn't established until 2012. That's one. Number two, it starts at Archer and spans north, Tulsa, right? It doesn't go south of Archer. South of Archer, it's called Cincinnati, which again, the irony of that being Cincinnati being a very Black town in Ohio, right? But it's Cincinnati from Archer to the south. To me, that is literal and figurative. To me, that is unfortunately Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? How does it resonate with you two?
Well, I'm like you. It shouldn't have took until 2012 to make that change. It should have been done. I've been doing a parade probably for 25 years, not only coordinating, but participating in, the parade. And the MLK parade used to begin at MLK Boulevard, which used to be Cincinnati and Pine. Now, it wasn't until like 7 years ago, that we transitioned to the MLK side. But I will say, as far as that, I don't agree with it. And I think this is a city council probably issue that probably needs to be addressed further, because that is a very good question. Because I will tell you, whenever I've traveled, we always look for Martin Luther King Boulevard, or Martin Luther King Street, because we know we will see one just about in every town, especially if it's the highly minority populated areas. But I want to say, before it became MLK Boulevard, that actually Dr. King traveled along that route. He did back in the early 60s. And, and we've had a parade there, for 20 years. We were so excited when it went from Cincinnati to Detroit, which was always a little confusing, to actually being Martin Luther King Boulevard, and made it to where, a parade could travel down the route that represent the Reverend Martin Luther King. But yeah, that's I've often wondered that what took so long, what took so long. I do.
And why does it only span half the city?
Right, exactly. It goes to Archie. And I think there's probably some history behind that maybe we just don't know yet. But I've always wondered, and my son even asked me, he said, why does MLK Boulevard is only on the north side? I don't see it on the south side, and that's the question. There we go. Here we go, with the challenging questions, that's not equity. That's not right. Of course it's not. And the thing is, we have to be truthful, truthful with our kids and be straight up with them as to what the facts, really are.
Rev?
Yeah, I think that road is symbolic to what we have, not just in Tulsa, but in America, which is, we have two Tulsas, we have two Americas. Anytime a revered patriot, I call him a prophet and apostle to America, such as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who has a holiday, for goodness sake, in his name, in his honor, was killed doing the work of the Lord, making this country and world a better place. Nobel Peace Prize winner. I mean, you can't, every category he meets, right, for just being a great person. And anytime his street is stopped, you mean to tell me that and because this is what I have been told, the reason why they didn't extend it further south is because you have business owners on that street that would have had to change their name, and they didn't want to have Martin Luther King name in their business address or on their letterhead. Guess what's on Cincinnati, brother?
What's that, brother?
City Hall. You mean to tell me the city of Tulsa doesn't want MLK on that address?
That's loud and clear, bruh.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, city councilors. Miss me with your fake, this is one Tulsa speech. Miss me with your whole, we're trying to unify. We can't even be unified on a street name.
Right.
You don't even want the name of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on your address. You don't even want to see that street name. You don't even want people who visit City Hall to see that name on the street corner. Think about what that does to little black children. I got two young black boys.
Exactly.
They driving up on MLK. They thinking they lost. What happened? I thought it was on MLK.
Yeah.
It's changed to Cincinnati.
Something else, right.
And every business on Cincinnati ought to have to answer for why they don't have MLK on their address. The city hall should have to answer to why MLK. It is to me the most blatant sign that this city is still racist. It's almost as like having a colored and a white water fountain.
Yeah.
You got a name for the colored side of town, and you got a name for the white side of town. And every time I go out to City Hall and protest reparations, God bless me, I try to remember to say something about it, because it is a shame, it is an affront, and it is hypocrisy before God.
Yeah, I think it's very, again, it's one of the first conundrums that that sort of resonated with me upon moving here 2.5 years ago, is just that. And then again, starting to learn more, I already knew obviously about Greenwood and Black Wall Street, because that's part of what brought me to Tulsa. But to see MLK and then to learn just as recently as what, last week that no, not even last week. National Day of Racial Healing was Tuesday.
Right, Tuesday.
This is how much of a blur
Yeah.
things have been.
Mhm.
But that was Tuesday. So to learn Tuesday that the street wasn't even named till 2012 also speaks to, I mean, again, I grew up in Enid. I know I rolled to the Woolworths lunch counter in 1976, 11 years or so after the passage of the civil rights legislation with my white best friend and still got hate, so I know
Right.
Oklahoma's late. I know sundown laws in this state weren't repealed till 1976 and Barry Switzer had already run championships by then, right? I know Oklahoma is slow, but I did not realize that it took that long, right? Again, understanding, I liken it to the fact that, Tulsa right now is the only city in the country that's removed a Black Lives Matter mural, right? So I guess we shouldn't be surprised. At the same time, it's bogus, it's just absolutely egregious. All right, Betty, I think we have another question before.
We have several comments and questions. Thank you. It seems a little maybe paternalistic too. This one is about racial profiling. This is not unique to Tulsa. My students, I'm HBCU, address subject to racial profiling all the time. It needs to be addressed. This isn't right. White people just have no idea. What can we do to really raise awareness?
Just
That's a good
continue
one.
to let our voices be heard and hope that someone eventually will hear us, hear our cries. We just talked about as far as, building trust, with the police. But who's listening? Who's listening? Just think. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And it's a topic that we have more than we shouldn't, we shouldn't have to discuss that as much as we are these days. Just in my opinion, we just should not, we shall overcome one day.
Rev?
Yeah, I think that we see I hate COVID-19. It is a pandemic of epic biblical proportions. But one thing COVID-19 has shown me is that America and society, when they really want to pay attention to a topic, they know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in less than 12 months, we got a vaccine and we have passed over $1 trillion in spending to avert the cause or to avert the consequences of COVID-19. We've shut down the economy to address this pandemic, where now some 400,000 people, I believe, have died.
Right.
3,000-4,000 people die every day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as terrible as that 400,000 is, we've lost hundreds of millions of lives to racism in this country. But yet this country does not treat racism nearly as much. They don't treat it with the same severity or scrutiny as they have COVID-19. And there is a vaccine now you can take to immune yourself from COVID-19. Unfortunately, we don't have a vaccine you can inject in your arm to cure you from racism.
Right.
The National Basketball Association has done more to bring awareness about racial inequality than the city of Tulsa or even the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
In this entertainment industry, these guys don't go to practice to learn how to talk about racial inequalities. Coaches don't spend time on that in the film room.
Right.
But you've seen more and more courage from athletes than you have elected officials. You've seen more and more courage from college athletes than elected officials. You've seen more and more courage from non-elected officials on the issue of race than you have from any of our elected officials here in the city of Tulsa.
Right. Right.
Except for our city council lady, Vanessa Harper. She's done a wonderful job speaking out against racism. But as far as our mayor is concerned, as far as our senators, as far as our councilmen, athletes make them look like they've done nothing.
Right. Right.
And the elected officials are the ones who are supposed to be charged with looking out for all their constituents. I love LeBron James, but I'm not his constituent.
Right.
I know about a pair of LeBrons in my life. I will pretty soon, but I know about a pair of LeBrons in my life. But he speaks up more for my cause
Yeah.
than my own elected officials.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Maybe we should put him on the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission.
Yeah. Let's put LeBron James on the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission. He's done more to speak about racial inequality than over half the members on the commission. And I'm on it. And I'm just going to be honest. And so it's just a sad fact, right?
Right.
So to answer this sister question, what can we do? We must continue to raise awareness. We must continue to hold people accountable
Right.
who's supposed to represent us. And I don't let anybody use the excuse, but we don't have the time nor resources. COVID-19 has shown us where there's a will, there's a way. America has a will to want to combat this virus, and she is finding a way. I'm old enough to remember also when we had a recession and we gave a $1 trillion bailout to corporations. We deemed what? Too big to fail.
Right.
I wish Black people were seen as too big to fail.
That's real. That's real.
Very real.
And I, you know what, if we were gonna had time to extend that metaphor, right, we would talk about vaccine hesitancy among Black folks, right?
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively. But
True.
I think we might need to have another conversation about that one too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm with it.
Topic within
Yes, sir.
itself. Exactly right. Yeah.
All right, so let me ask y'all this: what steps does the city of Tulsa need to take to address deep segregation and equity issues that exist here? What I mean, and this is literally, if you spoke to it a bit, but this is to the city of Tulsa, to the elected officials, to our city government, right? What steps do they need to take to fix this, or to help fix this anyway?
Well, first they have to acknowledge. They have to acknowledge it, like Reverend Turner said. Just speak the truth. Acknowledge that it exists. Segregation, inequality. Just acknowledge that it exists, and begin dialogue. Not with just community leaders, but just the community in general. Get dialogue. Let's. What we want is our voices. To be heard. Don't just let it go in one ear and out the other. Okay, we want action, to be taken, and it will take us as a city, as a state, even as a nation, to come together, and, to begin to heal. Like you have to heal, before you can do anything. So, and to bring about, hopefully, a change. I even will go as far as, equal access, as far as education, extending that education as far as allowing access, equal opportunities, for all our students. I will say that, this virtual town we're in, as far as our schools, kids virtual, have put our kids way behind academically. And Q, along with you and another organization, we have come together to create a Saturday school to help our youth so that they're not always on the back burner. Let them push forward, but we have to do our part in helping them get to where they need to be, because keep in mind, these are our future leaders. So we definitely want to make sure. So I just think we need to sit down and be consistent with that dialogue and, be proactive and don't give up. Keep pushing forward to make change.
Rev?
I agree. I think we mentioned a few things today, and I just concrete extend MLK throughout all of Tulsa.
Yes.
That's something that they can do at the next city council meeting. They had enough political motivation to bust up the words Black Lives Matter off the street. Where's that same political will and motivation to extend MLK throughout Tulsa? Secondly, reparations for the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. They have already done a study the state commissioned a study back in 2001, and they gave 5 recommendations that have yet to be adhered to.
Right.
I think we need to continue and redouble our efforts on the mass grave excavation. It is appalling to me that we are allowing one property owner of the old Booker T Cemetery to hold up a mass grave excavation. Right. If we truly see it as a crime, we need to treat it as such.
Right.
Our district attorney, as of today, has never investigated the worst crime in this city's history, the Tulsa Race Massacre. Our state attorney general has never investigated the worst crime in his state's history. Our U.S. attorney general has never. So, in my opinion, to them, Black lives still don't matter.
Right.
How can you have over 35 square blocks of Black-owned property disappear, be devastated, over 300 people killed, bodies dumped in mass graves, airplanes used for the first time in American history to drop bombs on American soil, and now one person go to jail?
Yeah.
Now one of the white perpetrators ever be charged with a crime? And I'm supposed to think that my life is valuable. Meanwhile, the district attorney, you write a bad check today, Q, you're going to jail.
Right.
He'll investigate and he'll prosecute that.
Yeah.
You run a couple of speeding lights, traffic lights, you're going to jail. He can prosecute that. So you can prosecute petty criminals, but you can't, and not even willing to prosecute the worst and biggest criminals in this city's history.
Right.
It's a shame. So those are just a few things they can do tomorrow if they had the will to do it.
If they had the will to do so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Betty, go ahead.
Are we ending?
Well, unfortunately, we're at 12:59. So
We are. That went by fast.
One thing that I would like to say first is this has been a great conversation, but I think we need to have more conversations like this. I mean, I think that is one thing you can do. And I think, Reverend Turner, something you said earlier, referring to churches. Oklahoma has a lot of churches. Tulsa has a lot of churches. Just drive through downtown, drive anywhere. And you mentioned, are those ministers, are those people in those churches willing to talk about racism and to talk about some of these inequities that exist? And I think, we need to get beyond the Instagram quotes of Martin Luther King and talk maybe more about what Dr. King was talking about when he was talking about economic equality. He was a radical person in terms of his thinking about change. Yes, he was peaceful, but I think he's not an Instagram quote that we need to go beyond that.
Right.
I saw, the quotes are great, but I think we can go beyond that.
Amen. And I agree with Betty. Yes.
I mean, and if there's anything that's any more real, again, to me, it's that on Monday, on MLK Day in Peckham, Oklahoma, the Church of the KKK passed out recruitment flyers.
Oh.
Right? And all of that, right, again, on MLK Day, in small town Oklahoma. And that was all, that was all by design. We're going to pass these out on this day, right? It's also the day before the inauguration, or 2 days before the inauguration, but we're going to pass these out on this day. And that, again, unfortunately brings me back to where we are in this country and where we are in this state in terms of the work that needs to be done. But you're right about more conversations, Betty, and we can continue to have them, and we need to continue. Again, this is a riot. A riot is the language of the unheard, and we keep rioting. We just got to keep rioting. So, but thank you, Miss Nekki Reagan-Neeley. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Robert R.A. Turner, for your time and your wisdom. And we'll have to bring you back again if you'd be so inclined to further engage in this work and these conversations. And Reverend Turner, I actually owe you a call about the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation that is now official. So
Yes,
and
official.
so we will build on that too. Okay, Betty. You know,
Thank you, Q. Thank you, OSU. Thank Tulsa. Thank you, Tri-City Collective, and thank you to our two panelists. You were amazing, and I truly appreciate you all of you taking the time to educate us a little bit and to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.